welcome to another edition of Global Positioning. Today we're at the HCTV studio in Helena, and with me from Missoula is the Executive Director of the Montana World Trade Center, Mr. Arnie Sherman. Arnie, thanks for making the voyage across the pass, as we say. I'm going to presume that many of our viewers are not familiar already with the work of the Montana World Trade Center. So let's begin with just a brief overview of its purpose and function and its relationship to the University of Montana.
Sure. The Montana World Trade Center is part of a network of more than 300 World Trade Centers in 80 countries. In many places around the world, it's the most identifiable building in the capital city or in a major city. The license for the Montana World Trade Center is uniquely held by the University of Montana, so that's why the center is domiciled on the university campus. And we essentially do two things. We help companies figure out where among the 200 or so countries in the world they ought to be selling their products or services or expanding their business if they're already international. And for many other companies and for the state in general, we work on global economic development activities like trade missions and trade education and other kinds of activities that will lead to increasing our capability to be competitive in the global market.
Yeah. Are you affiliated in any way with the business school, or do you have a lot of interaction with the business school?
Yes, we're domiciled at the business school at the University of Montana. We have a commitment to experiential education. We have a number of students. In fact, in my tenure, in my almost 15 years, we've had almost 200 students that have interned at the World Trade Center and have done serious work for businesses in Montana that are trying to research new markets, find partners, find distributors, find agents, find suppliers, and students play a very important role at the Trade Center in supporting that work.
Yeah. So we know that Montana is dominated by the small business sector. You know, we are a small business state. There's some large industries, some growing industries, but it's mostly small businesses.
Right.
And from what I've gathered from listening to them and reading about it, moving from you're a small business and you want to move into the international market, you're going to need a lot of professional assistance. Do businesses come to you and hire you to consult with them, or how does the relationship between you and firms
Well,
go?
two things usually happen. One is there's an event or activity going on in the life of the business where they're confronted with some daunting issue that's emerged. They've never shipped to Latin America. A buyer from the Middle East is wanting to buy their product, and they don't know how to engage in that financial transaction. Some precipitating events going on, and they are seeking out help, and they go to the state, or they generally find their way to the World Trade Center or some of the other resources, the U.S. Commercial Service, Department of Commerce, the Governor's Office, to us. Others offer advice and guidance and support and that sort of thing. Often we see opportunities that are out there, and we go to businesses ourselves and say, look, we've just come back from China, we've been to Brazil, we hear about or see opportunities, and we talk to companies about trying to meet that challenge or meet that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, before the program began, we were talking briefly about what was to me a big surprise. It might not be a surprise to a lot of people, that Montana is a major league producer of lentils, a legume, a nutritious, delicious legume. I happen to eat lentils. I didn't know we grew so many. But you have been exploring the expansion of a market opportunity in India, where lentils are almost a staple product. There's so much of curry dishes based on lentils. How did you make that connection? What's the shape of that?
Well, it's driven by people in the industry who know about it. Beans and peas and chickpeas and other lentils, were grown in Montana. There's an appetite for them globally. India is particular, where their protein isn't supplemented as much as ours by meat and beef. And the Department of Agriculture in the state and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, support expanding our export opportunities. And Montana this past year has planted 440,000 acres of lentils. I think it's only second to North Dakota in the amount of acreage being planted, and it's a good alternative crop for putting sequential planting going on it. It restores nitrogen to the land, And it's a growing industry and a big industry for Montana, which will affect other industries. The more we grow and more we export, the more we're going to transport, the more we're going to need container cars and other ways to move goods around. It leads to lots of other job creation.
Yeah. Well, with other earlier guests from China and Taiwan on this program, we've talked a lot about the export of wheat, and even in other directions, the export of beef, going to Russia and places like that. You know, you look at Montana's position on the map of North America and then look at it on the globe, we don't seem to be very well advantaged with respect to trading with the rest of the world.
We're totally disadvantaged.
Yeah,
actually.
I mean, you know, we're kind of isolated and remote, and there's a lot of distance that these products have to move to get to the marketplace. Describe, for example, how lentils, I think you kind of intimated already, how are these lentils grown out in the fields of north central Montana finding their way to India?
Truck to rail, rail to the Pacific Northwest ports, you know, across the Pacific Ocean to Europe. We are disadvantaged. If you draw a 150-mile circle around almost any town, city in Montana, there's a smaller population based in that radius than any place else in the world. You could draw a 150-mile circle.
Really?
Believe it or not. And so we are challenged. We have a project right now. In fact, we're working on a transportation project to see if there's alternatives to decrease cost of transportation to move goods globally and increase our competitiveness. We're sort of captive shippers in Montana for particularly containerized cargo and goods.
Right.
We mostly ship almost exclusively by truck. We do not have a regular container cargo service by rail in the state of Montana. It's the only state of 50 states that doesn't have that. So we're working to try to see what we can do with the transportation providers and governmental agencies and others, the public and private sector, to come up with a vehicle, a transportation intermodal capability that will allow us to have other alternatives beside truck to move cargo.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that the volatility in the petrol markets, you know, the price of oil makes a big difference with respect to the total cost of getting product from Montana to wherever it's going. And who bears the cost of transportation? Is it the seller or the buyer?
It's ultimately the seller, because he has to be competitive.
Yeah.
You mentioned petrol. I just saw for the first time in I don't know how many decades, the U.S. this year will be a net exporter of petroleum products, not importer.
Really?
And it's really interesting when you start looking at global trends, and that's why you can't make any generalizations about, you know, Montana's small and can't compete. This past 5 years, Montana exports have doubled. And during that time period, from 2005 to 2010, we went from $1 billion to $2 billion of exports, half of which was finished goods, which was not agricultural products, and only one other state, which was Idaho, doubled their exports during that same time period.
Right. Now, the majority of our exports are they still going to Canada, the most proximate market?
Canada's big, Japan, Korea. China's growing, EU is growing. It depends. In a state this small, when you're only exporting $2 billion, one big new producer in the state, one change in lentils or organic wheat or production of beef, one country changes its import structure related to Montana beef, and you would see a dramatic change in what country we would be shipping to. Organic wheat and wheat products, you know, going off to Indonesia and Malaysia, for example.
Yeah.
Russia shuts off or puts a high tariff on wood products to China, and they're coming to the United States, and they're coming to Montana to export wood. You know, we're trying to export coal from Montana. A couple of years ago, we looked at Israel as an interesting market to export coal. They wanted to buy U.S. coal. They had very, very stringent requirements about the kind of coal they wanted to receive. Korea doesn't have the same kind of stringent requirements. We're starting to export Montana coal to Korea. So those kinds of things can change when you're only dealing with, you know, in the global sense of things. In $16 trillion worth of global trade, $2 billion, one big deal or one big change can make a significant difference in who our markets are.
Yeah. Now, clearly, from the way you described this, you're kind of running an intelligence organization of a sort at the World Trade Center. I mean, you've got to keep tabs on so many factors in the global economy. Do you want to just say a couple words about your methodology? How do you keep track of the world and sift through mountains of information and data for the salient material that you can apply here in the state?
Well, we network with lots of other organizations who do that. We keep a core. There are 4 or 5 students every semester who work with us that do research. Our member companies, we have maybe 100 companies we're working with on an ongoing basis. They give us feedback. The U.S. Commercial Service, the State Department of Commerce is looking at things, and we know what we have. I mean, when it's all said and done, there are probably only 300 or 400 companies in the entire state that export at this point in time.
Yeah.
We know what we have, and as we're looking at what's going on, we see where is there an opportunity. Just like when we're talking about trade missions, we're looking to go to India this summer. Probably our next trade mission is going to be to Europe. Lots of time and discussion. China, India, and other places grab the headlines because they're new and there's lots going on there. But the European Union and its 27 member countries is the oldest trading partner with the United States. Collectively, between EU and the United States, it's 40% of global trade.
Wow.
It's about 40% of the global economy. And so
Yeah,
our old friends are good friends.
The EU collectively is the world's largest economy. I mean, it's a bunch of countries, as we know, 27 different countries, and they still have their nation states or nations with states and all that, but when they operate as a union, they are the largest. And while we're on that subject, a lot of us are kind of riveted by the situation in the EU today. I mean, there's still kind of an ongoing crisis with the euro, the currency that they adopted some time ago,
right,
without signing on to some seriously enforceable agreements on fiscal policy. So things are out of whack, to oversimplify.
I mean, you've oversimplified it, but that's the core of the issue. They have a common currency, but not a common fiscal or monetary policy. And so countries like Greece and others can go off kilter in terms of attracting and accumulating national debt and establishing internally, domestically, poor economic policies which affect the rest of the union.
Yeah. So I imagine you're watching that closely. Do you have a sense, I'm not asking you to predict any particular outcome, but it seems like the French and the Germans, who are sort of at the core of the EU, are managing to kind of muddle through a crisis, but there's lots of information coming daily where data from Spain and Italy and other countries sort of indicates that this is not a sustainable muddle. There's a lot of big decisions yet to be made. Do you have a sense of foreboding or of confidence that they'll figure this out, and thus we in the United States are not going to suffer a huge ripple right off the bat?
Well, given that they're our largest trading partner, we should be concerned about what happens there. We had the EU ambassador to the United States in Missoula in November, and who spoke on this issue and said, encouraging words about what's happening. I'm not an economist by training, of course, but I read what's out in the public press. And if you look at what the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or others say, and they say that there's probably a period of further economic degradation that's going to take place before everybody figures out how to overcome this. The United States has been muddling through a situation. I have great confidence in the long run that things will work out and that some needed changes among these 27 countries. I mean, remember, you got not only 27 countries, you got 27 legal systems, you have 8 governments, because you have the EU government. It is a very complex matter to try to get all of them to resolve problems that may be in their mutual benefit in total, but on an individual basis, certain decisions will impact individual countries negatively. So it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to move along, but ultimately, over time, I think it will resolve itself, and there's great opportunity for American companies to be selling products and services into Europe and accepting their investment into the United States. They see us as a safe haven.
Yeah. I think that might be the great hope of the United States, actually, is for all the problems we have that we've created for ourselves and problems that are visited upon us from abroad, it's still seemingly the place where the rule of law is still at work. Business law is well established. I mean, nobody's going to steal stuff from you. I mean, aside
unless
from
they
petty theft.
Unless they get away with it.
Unless they can get away with it. Yeah, I shouldn't get into this area, but that's what I see as large and convoluted as our fiscal and monetary problems are. On a comparative basis, it's still the safest place for people with capital to invest.
The global economy is probably going to grow at 3.5%, in total. If you're looking at the whole picture over the next few years, there may be a little down swoop a couple of years from now. China